the last, this is the last virtual one. Hopefully the next one will be in person. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to that one. But for today's meetup, we have a talk by Andrew. Andrew will shortly introduce himself. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or ask them at the end of the presentation. Over to you, Andrew.
Great, thank you for the introduction. Let me just reorganize myself here a bit, and then we can get started. So you should be able to see my screen, is that right, Adnan?
Yeah, I can see your screen.
Perfect, okay, oh, great. All right, let's sort it out. Okay. So email is a really old technology. It's been around in its present form since, I guess, the early 1970s, and not an awful lot has changed. It's stable, robust, and it's pretty reliable. However, in the interim, a lot of other messaging technologies have evolved, and with the most notable of these being probably WhatsApp and Telegram. Now, with all of these other options available, it's worth wondering whether email is still relevant, and my opinion is hell yes, it most certainly is. And there's some compelling reasons for this. It's pervasive, so there are a vast number of emails being sent every day, typically in the order of hundreds of billions of emails, which is really an astonishing volume of communication. It's accessible. Essentially, everyone has access to email if they want to. And it's versatile in the sense that it can handle a broad range of content. So text, HTML, but you can also dump images, audio, video, whatever into an email. It's super versatile. So despite its age, I still think it's pretty sexy technology, but the same can't be said for everything originating in the 1970s. So good evening. I'm Andrew Collier, and I'm from South Africa, as you may have picked up from my accent. I recently moved to the UK, and I'm currently staying in Berkshire. I'm interested in a bunch of different tech, and I also like running. I work for a small remote data science consulting company called Fathom Data. We're originally based in South Africa, but now we're globally distributed, as you'll see in just a moment, and we work with clients in Africa, Europe, Australia, and the US. So this is the team. We're a mixed bunch, and as you can see, we're spread across 3 continents and 5 countries. We're also diverse in our backgrounds and skill sets. Over the last few years, we've gained a lot of experience across the entire spectrum of data science projects. We do a lot of web scraping, we build a lot of databases, and we also do a bunch of automated reporting. And for automated reporting, our tool of choice is email. And because we use email for this purpose very frequently, and we do most of it from R, we've developed a package called emayili. Emayili is a slight variation of the spelling on the Zulu word for email. And I suppose you might be thinking, well, given that there are already a bunch of packages available on CRAN for creating emails in R, do we really need another package? Well, I think that there are a couple of things to be said in favor of emayili. Firstly, it works with essentially all SMTP servers. There are no complicated dependencies, and if you've ever had trouble installing R Java, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's been very actively developed. It works well with the pipe, and also it plays nicely with markdown, which is something that I'm going to be talking about at the end of this talk. So as you can see, these are some download statistics on the package from CRAN. And as you can see, its popularity is gradually growing over time. In an absolute sense, these numbers are fairly paltry, but we're getting there. Anyway, so let's talk about sending a message. So what components are involved in sending a message, be that a conventional letter or an email? Well, there are three core ingredients. Like there's the envelope or the header information in the case of an email. There's the letter itself or the email body. And then there's the delivery system, which in the case of emails is going to be a network of servers. But for any of those to make sense, we also need to have at least two parties involved, somebody to send the message and somebody to receive it. And these two parties are specified as addresses. And these addresses provide a name of sorts, it may be a pseudonym, as well as a location or a domain for an email. This is for each of the parties, the sender and the receiver. In emayili, these addresses are captured in address objects, addresses in S3 class. And you can either create an address object by using the constructor, or you can coerce it directly from a string. So these functions are pretty flexible, and they allow you to also create a multitude of address objects at the same time. So for example, if you just specify the domain and then a bunch of local names, then you get a corresponding vector of address objects being generated. Now, one of the things that we've found working with address data for our clients is that very often this is fairly, well, let's say it's grubby. And so the address class will do some simple data cleansing on the email addresses that you submit to it. For example, stripping out extra white space, which can actually be important because some SMTP servers will not actually digest an email address if it contains white space within the address. We've also got a function called compliant, and what that will do is check whether an address conforms to the standard sort of requirements for an email address. And you can either choose to simply, I guess, a Boolean result back from that, so a true and false, or alternatively, you can specify that you prefer to raise an error if there is a non-compliant email address. However, although the function checks that the addresses are syntactically valid, it doesn't say anything about whether the address works or not, right? So that's a completely different problem altogether. So let's now move on to the next ingredient in the process, and that is the envelope, right? And the envelope specifies the sender, and this in the case of a normal envelope is written on the back, and also the recipient of the message. And in addition to this, the envelope actually contains the message itself. And this is more or less the same, well, this analogy also applies to the envelope object in emayili. So you can start off by instantiating an envelope object. And again, this is another S3 class by calling the constructor. And there are a range of options that you can supply at constructor time. Here you can see that I've specified the to and the from addresses for a particular email. But this is not the only way that you can create an envelope. You can also just create a simple blank envelope and then populate it using these convenient methods. And I quite like this because it allows me to sort of create a chain of commands in which I gradually just build up the additional information that I'm adding on to the envelope. And this also works very nicely if you're generating multiple emails. Anyway, we'll get back to that a little bit later as well. And note here at the bottom that I'm actually using the two address objects that I created a few slides earlier. So the envelope class, as you might expect, has a print method. And when you print an envelope, you get back the email header. And if you have an email client that allows you to actually look at the underlying source of an email, then you would have seen this kind of header before. Basically provides a little bit of metadata about the message, the from and the to fields, so the two parties involved. It also immediately injects a date, so the time at which the envelope object is created, as well as a MIME version. So we're going to be looking a little bit later as well on creating compound messages with various different components, and that is going to involve a MIME. And then finally, there's one extra field that we've inserted, and that is the xmailer field. And that specifies that the client used to generate the message is emayili, and it also provides the version number. And this has been pretty handy for us because it's allowed us to debug problems that other people have had working with the package, because we're able to very quickly see from the emails that they send which version of the package they're working with. So in addition to the you probably also want to add in a subject to your message, right? So I think that's only sort of polite, and you can do that with the subject method. The subject can also actually be provided to the constructor as well. So there's like a one-to-one relationship between all of the different constructor arguments, as well as these helper functions for populating the various fields in the envelope. Now, if you need to add additional recipients, so for example, CC and BCC fields, then there are methods for these as well, as you can see. And here I've illustrated that there's quite a lot of flexibility around the way that the email addresses are provided. So you can either specify them as a single character vector, where you've got individual addresses which are separated by commas, or alternatively, you can specify them as a series of arguments to the method. And there's a third option as well, which I haven't illustrated here, and that is that you can call either of these functions with a vector of addresses. And this is probably the most flexible of the three, and the one that I use most commonly. So once you've created this envelope object, obviously it's got a whole bunch of parties associated with it, you know, the recipients and you as the originator of the message. It's quite convenient to be able to interrogate the envelope and see just exactly who's involved. And we've implemented a parties function, which creates a nice little table, and that shows you just exactly who is involved in this particular message. You have over on the left-hand side column an indication of what field the address is associated with, and then the various components of the field of the addresses are broken down in the remaining columns. And this means that these data play rather nicely with your conventional tools from dplyr, so you can use them to filter and sort and subset the columns in this data frame too. Okay, so we've dealt with the envelope. We now know who's sending the message and where it's going. What about the actual content of the message itself? And there are essentially two content types that are implemented: a text document and an HTML document. And each of these has a corresponding method. So for example, if you're simply wanting to send a text message, then you would use the text method. And as you can see from the display of the message now, we've got a text message inserted after the header. And similarly, if you want to create an HTML message, you simply use the HTML method and provide it with an argument, which is the HTML body. And here you can either have explicit HTML going directly into the HTML method, or alternatively, if you provide a valid file name or file path as the argument to the HTML method, then it will source the HTML from that file. And as you would expect, these the HTML can contain embedded images. So you can see here, for example, this is a base64 encoded image. It's a very small image, just simply a tiny red dot, but the same principle applies. You can embed an arbitrary image in an HTML email. Now we're talking about base64 encoding and attaching things to emails. It seems like a prudent time to look at the ability to add attachments. And you can do this with the attachment method. And here's an example of attaching the same image, but now rather than embedding it directly into the HTML, we have it as a separate attachment. And all of your binary attachments that you provide to the attachment method are going to be base64 encoded before they're injected into the email body. Now, a rather esoteric feature, which is actually going to be quite important for the new feature that I'm announcing this evening is the ability to use a content ID for attachments. And the idea with this is that rather than embedding an image in the body of an HTML message, you add that image as an attachment to the email, and then you reference it from the body of the HTML method. And the way that that works is via a content ID or CID. And if you take a look at the function calls here, you can see that the HTML body is has a CID specified in it, and this CID corresponds to the CID for the attachment. And so your email client, when it's rendering the HTML, will know whenever it encounters an image which references a CID, it then needs to go and find the corresponding attachment, and then grabs that attachment and inserts it into the appropriate place in the HTML. This, as it turns out, is super important if you're going to be using, you're going to be rendering markdown, but we'll get to that. So this is what the corresponding email looks like. And now you can see it's considerably more complicated. You've got the actual HTML body, and then you've got the image, and they are referenced to each other via those CIDs. Okay, so that's essentially the core functionality of the library. We have the addresses, we have the envelope, and then we've got a couple of methods for attaching content to that envelope. What about actually taking your message and delivering it to the recipients? Let's talk about delivery. And before I do, I just wanted to mention that the very famous scientist that I'm sure we're all aware of, Isaac Newton, acknowledged that his astonishing success was due to the fact that he could leverage the work of numerous other scientists. And the same is true for emayili, because we're taking advantage of functionality that has been implemented in a bunch of other packages, Glue being one of them, and especially the curl package by Jeroen Ooms, which actually facilitates all of the interaction with the SMTP server. So that takes a lot of the burden off us, because it's all very beautifully handled by the curl package. Okay, so if we're wanting to set up a connection to an SMTP server, this is done via the server method, and you need to provide a number of pieces of information. So firstly, a mandatory argument is the host. So where does that SMTP server reside? So for example, that may be smtp.gmail.com. And then a port. This is quite commonly port 25, but if you're using secure SMTP, then it may be 465 or 587. You'll know these things from the configuration of your server. And then a username and a password. And I normally store these, at least for local purposes, in environment variables. So you can see here that I'm retrieving my username and password from the environment. Now this server function will return a closure, and that closure captures all of the credentials associated with the server. And you can then use that closure as a function to send a message. So you simply call the closure with one of these envelope objects as argument, and it then dispatches that email off to the SMTP server. Now, there are a couple of nice features around this. You can use the verbose argument to specify whether or not you want to see the details of the interaction between the client and the server. This can be very handy if you're having to debug issues with communicating with the server. You can reuse a connection, and if you're sending a large volume of emails, then this can be very useful, because otherwise you need to initiate a fresh connection for each email, and this takes quite a lot of time. So it's definitely going to slow you down. And finally, there is exponential backoff in the case of error, which means that if there is a communication problem between you and the SMTP server, then the emayili will pause for a period of time. It'll try again. It'll then pause a little bit longer, try again, etc. It'll repeat that a number of times before finally giving up. Okay, so I've done an awful lot of talking. Let's do a quick demo. And for that, I'm going to just rearrange my screen a little bit. Can you see my R Studio now?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So here we've got a script for sending a simple email using emayili. So I'm starting off by loading the library and then calling the server function and specifying the host, the port, and a username. Now, in this case, I'm using this host SMTP bucket, and this is very convenient service in the sense that it's a black hole into which you can send emails, but you can also go and check whether they arrived or not. So we're going to send our emails there. We're creating an envelope. The message is going to be from Bob, and he's sending a message to Alice. And the subject of the message is the dreaded red dot, and the body of it is delete at your peril. And then there's an attachment, which is the red dot PNG. And then once we've created the email object, we send it via the server, and we're choosing to have verbose logging. So when I run this, you're going to see a bunch of logging taking place in the console. So let's source that. And there we go. So you can see that it created the email object, and then you have all the detailed logging for the interaction with the server. This is very, very useful if you're debugging communication issues. So now, of course, the proof is in the pudding. So let's go across to SMTP buckets and take a look. So this is the service, and what I need to do here is just specify who sent the message. So it was from Alice. Let's pop in Alice over there, and let's search. Right, and there you can see a message sent by Alice to Bob at 27 minutes past 6. That was just a moment ago, and the subject of the message was the dreaded red dot. And there you can see the body of the message as rendered by emayili. Okay, so that's in a nutshell the way that the library works. So let's go back to the slides because I have more to show you. Right, so the next thing that I want to show you is the mail merge capabilities. So what happens if you want to send a whole bunch of messages and you want to make these personalized? Well, here we've taken advantage of some functionality from the glue package. Glue allows you to interpolate the values of variables into a string. And here's an example. We create a variable called name and insert the value Bob into that. And then the body of my message now has a placeholder, and we're using double braces rather than single braces to indicate a placeholder with the name of the variable name. And when you then render the corresponding message, you can see that Bob's name has then been inserted into the body of the message. So we can scale this up to send a bunch of messages. So supposing you have the names and addresses for a collection of people, and you want to send each of them a message, and you want to make that a personalized message. Well, you've got their data in a data frame. You create a generic envelope object specifying the sender, in this case Alice, and you then use the pwalk function from per to iterate over each of the records in your data frame. And for each of those, you use the to method to specify the email, and in the text method, you're using this string interpolation to insert the person's name. So each of these people on the list will get a message, hi, Bob, for example. Okay, so let's see how that works in practice as well. So bring back my R Studio. And so here's my mail merge script. Again, pulling in emayili and also dplyr and per, creating another server object, and now also creating a data frame with the names and email addresses of those 3 fictional people, creating the envelope. So the originator, the sender of all of these messages is always going to be Alice, but of course you can change that. And then iterating over each of the records in this tibble and sending a message to each one of them. So let's run that. And there'll be a flurry of activity in the console as each of those messages is sent out. And because the connection has been reused, it's super fast. Let's then go back and consult our SMTP bucket to see if they were delivered. And so we're once again sending from Alice. So let's go back here. I'm just going to copy her email address again. Go. All right, so there we go. 3 messages from Alice. Hi Bob, hi Erin, hi Wendy, and there are their corresponding email addresses. So with this, you have all that you require to become a spam king, I suppose, although I'd prefer that you used emayili for good rather than evil. Right, so I think we're moving on to the final topic that I wanted to talk about, and I'm cognizant of the fact that I've been at this now for almost half an hour, and I'm sure fatigue is setting in for you. So let's talk about the final item, and that is actually a new feature that we're going to be rolling out in emayili over the next day or so. We've been working on this for a little while, and we think that we've got it working rather nicely now. So it would be awfully nice if, in addition to being able to create text and HTML documents, it would be nice if we could take advantage of markdown, because markdown allows you to generate HTML without having to worry about all of the syntactic details of actually writing HTML. So the first question is, can we render plain markdown straight into an email? And up till this point in emayili, you couldn't, but you can now. This is nothing really new though, because in the Blastula package, there's the MD function, and MD has been around for a while, and it allows you to render plain markdown directly into an email. Now in emayili, we have a render function, and if you're wanting to simply render plain markdown, then you would specify the plain argument and set it to true. And this is what the result looks like. So for example, I'm just creating an empty envelope and then using the render method, specifying a chunk of markdown and selecting plain equals true. And then here is the resulting email, and you can see that that markdown has been translated into HTML. And this means that when that's delivered, it's going to be rendered as HTML in the person's client. Okay, so I feel that that's fairly cool, but as I said, it's really nothing new. What would be really nice would be if we could render R markdown directly into an email, because this means that you could have R code chunks. You could execute those code chunks and have the results of that code then automatically being inserted into an email object, and that email then being dispatched. I think that would be awesome. And again, this is functionality that actually exists. So there is the mail merge package, which does precisely this, right? It takes our markdown, renders it into an email, but it only works with Gmail. emayili, we've implemented the feature, and it works with all SMTP clients. So your mail server at work, it's probably not Gmail. You can use this functionality with that server. Okay, so supposing we have a super simple R markdown document. So we've got the YAML header specifying a title and the output format, which is going to be HTML. And then we have a simple code chunk, which is just evaluating a ratio. Now, if we pass that, okay, oh, sorry, that's in a file called pi.rmd. If we use the render function and specify that as the first argument, I've got include CSS equals false here as the second argument. There's a good reason for that. When you render R Markdown, it produces a very large amount of CSS, which is all going to be dumped in the head of the message. And I wouldn't be able to fit the entire message onto a slide if I included the CSS. You have the option of excluding it, in which case you get a very nice and concise rendered body. And if you look at the details of the body of this message, you can see that we've got the title, right? And the title was specified back here, right? Approximating pi. We've got a title tag, which specifies approximating pi. And then down here, we have some monospace chunks of code in which you have the code itself specifying 22/7. And there's the approximate result, which is being generated by R. So this is, R is doing some compute, it's generating the results, it's rendering that as HTML and dumping it all directly into the email. And so let's take a look at a quick demo of how this one works in practice. So in this case, I'm not going to use SMTP bucket because, as you saw earlier, you can see the internals, the guts of the message, but you can't actually see it rendered. And really, the nice thing about our Markdown is the final rendered document. So in this case, I'm going to use my Gmail account, and I'm also going to we're going to use interpolation as well. So I'm loading up the emayili library. I'm specifying my name into the name variable, and I'm pulling in my username and my password from two environment variables. Then creating a server object, in this case specifying the Gmail SMTP server, using my username and password. Right, so that's the setup. And now I'm creating an envelope, right, with, I'm sending it to myself. So from me to me, and I'm giving it a subject, which is monthly KPI report. And you'll see the document that we're going to be rendering in just a moment. And the final operation here is just to call render and provide it with a path to the Markdown document. And let's just take a look at that. This Markdown document was put together by my colleague Megan, and it has the normal YAML header, some setup instructions for Netta, and then it reads in some data from the file. It says hello name, and of course in this case my name is going to be interpolated into that name placeholder. It generates some automated text. So this is our KPI report for something that R is going to calculate. And then it does some data wrangling, and then finally produces a plot using ggplot. And prior to the plot, we've got a bulleted list, and inside that bulleted list is some other calculated content. So by how much the current month's conversion rate is differed from the same month in the previous year. Okay, but basically this is a Markdown document in which a lot of the content is going to be generated dynamically by R in the process of actually rendering the document. Okay, so now I'm going to run this and hold thumbs that everything works. So there we go. Okay, you can see the rendering happened very, very quickly. There's the base 64 encoded ggplot image, and it's now telling me to check my email. So let's do precisely that. I'm going over here to my inbox, and I'm going to be impatient and just refresh it. Aha! So there we have the monthly KPI report, which has been delivered to me. And there is the body of the report. You can see that it's inserted my name. The month has been generated dynamically. This percentage change is also generated dynamically. And then finally at the bottom here, we've got this very pretty ggplot graph, which is illustrating the data. And for us, this is going to be a complete game changer, because most of the automated reporting that we do involves using R markdown. Typically, we're going to execute a database query. We're going to do some work with the resulting data, and then we're going to generate a report using the data that we've just processed. And historically, this would be like a multi-stage process, because you'd render that report to a file, and you would then attach that file or source that file into your document. But there are a couple of problems with this. So attaching it works really nicely. So you have this standalone HTML document which you attach to your email. But the problem with this is that the recipient then has to open the attachment to actually see the content. And this is not ideal, right? You actually want the person to see the content immediately they open the email. So actually the content needs to be in the body of the email rather than an attachment. So what one can do then is to try and read in the contents of the HTML file and inject that into the HTML body. But unfortunately, although that works for some mail servers and clients, it doesn't work for Gmail, which is a pretty pervasive service, because Gmail doesn't tolerate these embedded image objects. So if you've got a base64 encoded image and it's actually embedded in your HTML, which is what's going to happen if you've rendered from Markdown, then Gmail is just going to ignore that image. And so this is where that content ID that I mentioned earlier comes into play. So what we do is we render the Markdown document to HTML, then we extract each of the embedded images and we transfer those into attachments with the corresponding CID, and then we reference those CIDs from the embedded HTML document. And this is the results that you have, a beautifully rendered R Markdown document in the body of your email, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, so let's wrap this up. That's the conclusion of what I had to tell you about emayili. As I hope I've conveyed, I'm very enthusiastic about this package. I think it's awesome. If you use email from R at all, then I would encourage you to give this a shot. I want to acknowledge a couple of people on my team. So Megan, Matt, James, and Robin, who helped me put this talk together. Once again, I'm Andrew Collier. My handle is DataWookie. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn and GitHub, and that's my email address if you want to get in touch. And right now, if there are questions, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for a great talk. If anyone else has any questions, just shoot, because I have a few. So, but I'll start anyway. So, so what use cases have you seen for your package other than, yeah, what have you seen other people use your package for?
Well, I mean, we don't really have feedback on specifics of what people are doing with the package. I know that people are using it for automated reporting. I hope they're not using it for spamming. You know, we have used it in the course of developing it for a number of our clients, most of whom are doing internal reporting. And, you know, historically, their workflow sort of prior to automating things in R has been go to the database, query some data, copy it across into Excel. In Excel, they're going to create some charts and tables, and then they take those and they copy them across into Word. And in Word, they add some content and text, and they render that probably to a PDF, and they attach that to an email, and then they send that off. And it's a completely manual process, and that process has to be repeated over and over, weekly or monthly or perhaps even daily. So by automating the entire process, it means that it's less onerous for the people involved. It's also more robust because, you know, that kind of repetitive task errors inevitably creep in. So yeah, automating something like that really makes a lot of sense. And being able to, you know, render your report directly into an email and then just dispatch it, I think makes the whole process super easy.
Oh yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I was thinking more of like problem that I recently have is having a long running process, and when it or not just any process really, and I mean, not being able to monitor it, and if it would like see if it fails, it would be nice if there was some functionality around it that would send me an email that it has failed.
Yep. So we do that. As I think I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, we build a lot of web crawlers, and web crawlers are inclined to fail, but our clients are relying on the fact that the crawlers are working and that their data is being pushed through. So we've quite often built a system where we have our crawlers that have been deployed probably on ECS, and if they fail, we've got a job that periodically checks in on them. And if they've failed, then we send using emayili an alert message to someone who's going to respond and check why exactly the crawler failed.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, but there are other options there. So potentially for alerting in that kind of case, Telegram or WhatsApp may be a more sort of direct method of conveying that concise bit of information that something is broken. But if you're wanting to say this is broken and here's a whole bunch of information that may help you debug the problem, then email is going to win hands down.
Okay, cool. What about, so you mentioned a number of other packages, and I was thinking more along the line of like RStudio Connect. I don't know what they use. Is that different? Is that similar?
I don't have an awful lot of experience with RStudio Connect, but I mean, what I do know is that it's a commercial product, right? And yeah, if you don't want to buy RStudio Connect, then you're obviously going to be looking for a free alternative. Yeah,
I guess that's true. But I don't know who wrote. Was it Blastula? Isn't that RStudio's?
Blastula, well, Blastula is one of the RStudio packages.
Oh, okay, so they probably use that. Okay, cool.
I'm guessing they probably do. Yeah, I mean, Blastula is a brilliant package, and it does implement rendering plain markdown.
Okay. Yeah. So what's next then? What are the future, like, do you have any future developments on the?
Sure. Well, I've just got over this major hurdle of getting the R markdown working really nicely. So I think probably the next thing that I'm going to be working on is the unsexy part of developing a package, and that is documentation. So the documentation at this stage is very, very sparse. Writing documentation is not something that excites me, but reading other people's magnificent documentation is something that does, and I want to be more like them.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, probably spend some time documenting the existing functions, and then we've also got a couple of sort of obscure header fields that we want to expose on the email messages, and bits and pieces. But at the moment, in terms of large features, I don't really have anything on the roadmap. So if anyone has any ideas for cool things that could be baked into a package like this, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I was I guess it's not so much about my idea was not so much about sending emails, but more about if you have already more like downloading emails maybe, but like if you can connect to the SMTP server, like you can connect to Gmail, it would be cool if you could like download all your emails if you wanted to analyze them, something like that. But
yeah, but I mean that's a different interaction though, because if that's going to be like an IMAP or a POP3 server, so so the process of sending an email is very different to the process of downloading an email. Okay. But I mean, potentially that POP3 or IMAP interaction is something we could build into emayili. But I mean, I think it's a different kind of scenario, like the creating email rather than like processing it after the fact.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. It could be maybe better for another package or anything, something like that.
I feel there must be packages for downloading emails as well. I feel fairly certain there are. given the vast number of packages available on CRAN?
I have not looked at it recently. I think I looked at it, what was it, 4 years ago, and it wasn't, at that time there was not anything that I could use. I have a more like developer kind of question, which is that in the beginning you mentioned that one of your that you use classes, S3 classes, and I was just wondering why you went down that route of using class system.
Yeah, so I think that the reason that I did that was that you know I kind of straddle this line between Python and R, and I like the class-based approach of Python, and to a certain extent I wish that R was a little bit more like that. And I also like the sort of the idea of having generic methods that work on different objects and do something that's predictable. So for example, you know, you have an as character method and you can be fairly confident that if you apply it to your object, it's got to do something sensible. And similarly for the print method. So yeah, that's the reason that I went with the S3 class. And I mean, chose S3 because it's the simplest and I can wrap my mind around that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I don't have any questions. I don't know if any of the attendees have any questions. Yeah, go ahead if you have a question.
So I wanted to ask Andrew, thanks for the package. I'm very excited. You know, I'm a super fan of the package. I wanted to ask whether, because now that we have the integration with R Markdown, can we add a CSS sheet in the parameters that we can use to render? Because that's something I've been thinking about. We had, for example, in my organization, we have a branding guideline that goes on pages. So one idea I had would be to create a CSS style sheet that we can use and apply it to the emails so that it conforms with branding guidelines and so on.
Yes. So the short answer to that question is no, not at present, but maybe that's the next big feature that I'm going to work on. That sounds awesome. So just to give you a little bit of background on what's happening behind the scenes at present. So when we render an R Markdown document, if you actually open up a rendered R Markdown document and look in the header, you'll find that there are lots of different styling chunks. At the moment, what we're doing is taking all of those styling chunks and consolidating them into a single style blob. And in principle, there's no reason why we shouldn't then pull in some external CSS and inject that instead into the email body. So I think that's a brilliant suggestion. Yeah, because I mean, I agree with you that I think that like a generic R Markdown document is beautiful in its own way, but if you have company style guides, you're going to want your reports to be branded appropriately. So yeah, for sure. I'm sure we can make that happen.
I'm excited about that because surprising how motivated the communications department get when you start sending out this bunch of emails that don't comply with it. So I think it would be cool to be able to just generate some of that styling and incorporate it into a sheet, CSS theme that you just use to attach to all the emails that we send to me to run. But I'm excited with R Markdown because I have a bunch of reports I need to start sending out. So I'm going to start using that as soon as possible.
Awesome. And it's fantastic to speak to a fellow South African.
I didn't know you had moved, but I'm excited to hear what's going on in the UK.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the question. And that's about it, really. I think I'll get back in contact for any other material that I can send around. And that's it for the September meetup of BirminghamR. There's not one planned for the next time, so if you do know anyone or wants to present or give a talk, do let me know. And otherwise, we'll just keep an eye out on the meetup page. And we'll see. Hopefully, we'll see you soon. Like really see you soon. And have a good evening, everyone. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.